Welcome back to the Self-Reg show, everyone. I am here again with Joel and Inej and Trisha, and they will all say a quick hello to you. If you have not heard part one of this conversation on looking at self-reg and how it shows up in social work, counseling, clinical practice, and all the lessons we can learn, I really encourage you to go back and listen to part one. There were some amazing stories, amazing takeaways, and lots of practical ideas there as well. So today we're going to dive in further. We're really looking deeper at how you might use the 5 domains and with some ideas and some strategies around all of that. And then we will be exploring self-reg for ourselves and in different kinds of ways as well. So welcome back, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Susan.
you.
Thank you, Susan.
Can you give everyone a quick hello, where you're from, and just enough that they know how amazing this panel is? Trisha, do you want to go first?
Hi, everyone. Trisha Mendoza. Thanks for coming back. If you haven't seen the first episode, I encourage you, like Susan said. I'm a psychotherapist in private practice, as well as a consultant for self regulation in the early years out in Southwestern Ontario.
Inej.
Thank you, Susan, for having us back. Like Trish, I'm also from Southwestern Ontario, Cambridge to be specific. I am a therapist in private practice, so a social worker by trade, and I started my career off as a child and youth worker. So currently in private practice, I tend to see the majority of people I see is children and youth.
Lovely. And Joel.
Yeah, and I'm Joel Gunzburg. I am the assistant head of the lower school here at Sandy Spring Friends School, and then also have a private therapy practice in Bethesda, Maryland, which is just outside of Washington, D.C., literally about 1 mile from the D.C. line. And been in practice for about a little bit over 20 years now. It's hard to say out loud, but yeah, a little bit over 20 years.
I got a really funny email from you, Joel, last June, I think, and it was like, as an American, you're like, I need my Canadian self-reg, because you were on your way up to visit us and spend some days with us at the summer symposium in
Yeah.
Ontario, and you're like, I need my self-reg family.
Yeah, my Canadian family for sure. My Self-Reg family definitely brings me back to balance.
Yeah, we have many American friends, and but it self-reg kind of unites us all. So we are going to dive in this time, really thinking about the 5 domains and how you use that particular part of self-reg. There's 5 steps, or I like thinking of it as 5 practices in Dr. Stuart Schenker's self-reg model. The first one is reframe behavior, which we're doing all the time. The second one is recognize stressors, and we do that across 5 domains, which is what we're going to look at today. Then we look at ways we can reduce those. It's stress not the enemy, right? We need stress in our life, but we're all feeling there's stressors operating on our brain and bodies right now, each one of us, and that's just part of being a human. It's excess stress, too much stress that we're thinking about. So step 3 is really about how do we reduce the stress and also the stress response. We can work on that one as well. Step 4 is about reflect and enhancing stress awareness. It's brain body stuff. So noticing I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm cold. I like thinking of it like a sneeze coming on. I feel, I know something's happening. I have to have that sort of awareness that it's going on, and what do I do about it? And also even noticing a stress response in others. So you just have that awareness. You're picking it up with your own nervous system. And step 5 is restore, which is a really big one. It's more than just a little add-on at the end and a couple of strategies. It's that deep connection to being a human being. So we're diving into looking at the 5 domains in particular. And all of you have told me that, and there are some good things coming, people that are listening, that you use the 5 domains a lot in your practices. So I'm just going to invite anyone, whoever wants to jump in first, to give us a little bit of a background about how you use these. Maybe I'll go to Joel. You told me, Joel, that you keep the 5 domains on the wall behind you.
Yep. So at this
Yeah.
office, you see I've got my mug from Symposium, and then something that my kids made me for Father's Day a long time ago. Those are handprints and their footprints and stuff. And of course, to reject hate. This is my office at school. When I'm at home, there, or not home, sorry, at my practice in Bethesda, there's a whiteboard behind me. And on that whiteboard, you'll see something that looks a little bit like this. For those who are listening, I've got written at the top biological, emotion, cognitive, social, and pro-social. And then it's written in lines to categorize different things. I keep it there because as if I'm going to break into connecting to the mind body, we'll start doing something, and I'll talk to a client, and we'll kind of help make things aware. So if you want, Susan, if you told me a story, I can show you a little bit how it works.
Okay, and I just have to say, those of you listening that aren't counselors, social workers, therapists, Joel had to slip and said that he was at his house with the 5 domains, but I want you to be listening in that same way, because I don't have a I promise you I don't have a board on my wall, but
Yeah.
I really think about the 5 domains in my house all the time, right? And it helps me make some decisions, so it can apply in all kinds of different ways. So I thought I would tell a story. I've told this one before, but it's sort of a dramatic story all in one place that I would love to have your insights on. So I was at the time this is a school. It was a K to 12 school, but mostly 7 to 12. So there were 600 students, something like that. And most of them are 7 to 12. It was just a very small K to 3 or K to 6 in the school. And Kelsey was in, I believe she was in grade 9 at the time. And I'd known her for years. She had a trauma history and some diagnosis and things that were going on, and had been in special classrooms sort of growing up as well. So she was on my radar. My role at the time was like, I was the inclusion, I was the support person. I was called a program support teacher, but that was basically the role where you go and help all the other teachers. You also are responsible for the IEPs and programming and things like that. So I knew Kelsey well. And Kelsey would be one of those kids that fits. You joked about the word allostatic overload in the part one of this, Joel, but she would totally fit allostatic overload, which just tells you a whole lot of homeostatic imbalance, a whole lot of excessive stress, and it goes along with trauma for sure. But anyway, she would go 0 to 500. And so that would look on the outside like she was, sometimes people say 0 to 60 or what have you. But you looks on the outside like she's just fine, and then all of a sudden she wasn't. I had a reframe. Someone recently reframed, instead of thinking 0 to 60, think 55 to 60. How brilliant is that? They look like they're, anyway.
Mm.
So overreact. So that's the second one. This is Bruce McEwen stuff. Overreact. So the slightest little thing was just like totally explosive, which was Kelsey. It takes forever to come back down to a balanced state, which Joel's been talking lots about balance. We mean homeostasis, enough that you can think and make a decision, and it doesn't mean you have to be perfectly zen or anything like that, but that front part of your brain is back online, right? So it would take forever. And volatile, so physically volatile is one of it, hitting, punching, hands all over walls, or emotionally volatile. So it's just those four things are a sign of. So that was Kelsey from, always. And she was smart as a whip. And I even had people along the way tell me she had no empathy. And then it wasn't true. She was involved in bullying. There was all sorts of things she was involved in, and all kinds of stuff she struggled with. But I watched her mom ran childcare, and I watched her with babies. And I'm like, that's empathy. It's there in spades, right? So anyway, it's a Friday afternoon. And they decided to have an assembly on this Friday afternoon, Joel.
Mm-hmm.
And for and which is a terrible time to have one, but there was some particular reason it had to be a Friday afternoon, but we already know, okay, so stressors there. But and my job, these most of the kids had to take a school bus back home at the end of the school day, which was about a 20-minute drive from where this school was. And so my job, I wasn't running the assembly, and I was just basically making sure, I was like an extra body for this last hour or whatever of the day, and trying to get the students from the assembly onto the bus. And it's Friday. And so Kelsey is sitting in the group and she hated being called out she hated being embarrassed. She would struggle with sitting still all the time. She was she didn't like physically, she was really tall. She was like almost 6 feet tall, and she didn't like physically standing out in any ways, definitely being shamed in front of her peers. But having to sit through an assembly was like kind of excruciating for her. So she's sitting at the back of the group, and she won't stop talking, right, with these, and they're trying to get them all quiet. And it's actually going on way too long to get them quiet. I felt bad for them. And so I asked her to be quiet. I tried to do it in sort of the best way I could. And she's a bit saucy back to me. So she's not super saucy, Joel.
Mhm.
Like she doesn't swear at me or anything, but she gives me a little whatever, and then she's quiet. I leave it. I'm good with that, right? And so the end of the day, so what happens is she goes through the assembly, and everything seems okay. And we're walking out of this school, and there's, I don't know, 150 feet from where they are at to where all the school buses are out front. And I hear from behind me one of my colleagues who meant well, but one of my colleagues who had watched all of this and had the misunderstanding that I was being soft. And
Ooh.
I hear it from behind me. Yeah, don't even get me started. There's another part to this, but anyway.
Yeah, I bet.
Uh, anyway, so from behind me say, Kelsey, and then within a six, so all I'm literally herding them out, these teenagers out, right? And within 2 seconds flat, Kelsey is, telling her to F off. The teacher's name, who I'll just say is Miss Smith. Miss Smith is yelling at her to get to the office. Kelsey goes into the office, proceeds to upset a chair, gets into the principal was pretty good about it, but at this point, she's doing, slamming doors and knocking stuff over, and I just have to add, she gets suspended, and of course I'm the one who has to drive her home.
Mm.
And then I get back, and the teacher said to me, "You're welcome." I'm like, "You're welcome." She truly in
Wow.
her heart believed that Kelsey needed to be taught a lesson. So that's my story. How would you reframe how would
Okay.
you reframe Kelsey through the five
So
domains?
my brain is going a million miles a minute. I don't know if anybody's watching, you might see my hand moving as so I was taking a ton of notes. So
Oh, cool.
if this was a session, I wouldn't have been doing it. I would have been doing all this in my brain. I have a pretty good memory to stuff, so I will call out. So biological stressors for you, I'm wondering if you're tired. So if I'm just looking at you,
Okay.
I'm
Yeah.
assuming it's the end of the day. You're tired. You've been working. This is a moment when you talk about 55 to 60. That's probably for you. But if I think about Kelsey, I've got a ton of notes on Kelsey. We know she's got a trauma background. We know she overwhelms easily and often. We know it's hard to calm her down, and we know that being embarrassed, that there's a piece to it that goes more to emotion. But I'm thinking about biological, that links to her being tall. So that's always going to be a stressor at play, right? So, like, if the teacher calls her out, there she is, she's tall, everybody can see her. That's at play always. You need to know that, right? So, I would bring that up. If we're talking about body, brain, that I would write that up on the board. Then I look at emotion. I'm thinking you're probably, and this is me going into schools and thinking about where things, when you're telling me about what time of day and an assembly is coming in, you may be in a frustrated state, maybe being in a space where you don't want to be. So you're not operating at your best, maybe frustrated, maybe not. And there is a lot to manage an assembly. I just took a picture. We did an assembly in our lower school, and I took a picture of one. You see nothing but pure joy in about 98% of the picture. And I sent it to our staff saying, how great is this? But also, if you look at some of the other pictures before that, the amount of work that teachers do to keep an assembly and make it happen is unbelievable, right? So that stress level of a teacher, hey, we've got to make sure that they're maintaining for our admin, for our everybody, right? So
And I
that
should
that
say, I was actually in a pretty good state. It wasn't my assembly. It wouldn't have been my call, but I was pretty until the end. It was I have to add, it was a PBS assembly.
right,
Outside voice. Yeah, no, anyway. It was literally,
right.
that's what it was. And they were frustrated.
Yep.
They were all these things you're talking about.
Yep. Well, if you go into Kelsey, her emotion stress, we know trauma, we know her anger, we know that anger is probably there, regardless of whether it's prompted or not. We also know that it's explosive. I wrote question marks next to anxiety and embarrassment because how much were they at play here? Shame is a big one. There's probably some shame. And then again, I went back to anger and embarrassment because it was validated that she was angry and probably embarrassed by the teacher after you took, because so it's a second layer of embarrassment. Then I would look at there. I got some question marks, and this is the work that we do when you're talking about detective work, right? Like I wrote IEP question mark. Now you don't have to tell me what her diagnosis was, but we know that something was there with that. So there's IEP. My question mark, I wrote processing question mark, right? So like, is there a processing issue in how she's able to communicate? And then we also know she's intelligent. So how much of boredom is at play, right? So that's
Totally.
and she's not going to be able to communicate well with others, is what I'm hearing in a lot of this too. So we have to be aware of her kind of connection to adults. You talk about some adults who think that you need to go hard. There's going to be lots of different interpretations. Social, as you can see here, like I have the full
Yeah.
thing is filled out, and I'm just thinking about you, all the different things that are at play and how you're helping to help Kelsey with her socialization. You probably know about her IEP stuff. You've probably helped with some of the prompting. You've probably given some of the extra accommodation. What your role is in that and all that. So I've got some of that, but more if we look at Kelsey, I'm wondering how she shows up socially. How do others react to her volatility? How do others feel about her unsafe behavior? What that might look like? How does she interpret that behavior that her classmates may have? Um, you brought up mom. I'm intrigued by what's the relationship with mom. So I put a question mark next to that. That would probably be never anything that would go up on the board. That would just be something I'd be thinking about. And then, okay, what kind of anxiety around the assembly, just being in the assembly and like being around people who she's sitting near, who's giving her a hard time, who's not, who's looking at her, who is talking to her, because there someone like Kelsey may get action from some of her classmates, and then her being
I love
belligerent with you for talking, or like that's there could be. So I wrote something in here around pro-social, and I know that oftentimes people get stuck in the what's pro-social stress and what's social stress. And I think the best way to put it, I know you guys do a great job talking about empathy, is a good way to express pro-social, but I think also it's your interpretation of somebody else's facial expressions,
Totally.
right?
And
So
we're going to link you. You write a great blog on pro-social stress, and that we'll link here together. But I love what you just did. First of all, then I'm going to
yeah.
say one thing about pro-social. And for those of you listening, and those of you that are not able to see, it's as simple as using the 5 domains. It's always all five. That's the first thing. And they multiply, and you're some of it you already know. What you're trying to look for is all the ones you never thought about, and it begins to paint a fuller picture. The one thing I will say about the pro-social stress, so with pro-social work, it's really more tied to emotion than it is to the social domain. So what the difference is, that it's about taking on the stress of others, right? So it is empathy, but it's the stress of empathy, how exhausting that is when we worry about a young person, right? We can be really worried about that. But in this particular case, injustice, I have to tell you, I think even more than being embarrassed, Kelsey felt it was totally unjust that Miss Smith called her out, right?
Yep.
And I actually had a lot of pro-social stress because I was like, I felt bad for that this had happened to her at the end of the day when it didn't need to, right? And even if something bad had happened, we could have dealt with it on Monday morning. It's Friday afternoon; they have to be on a bus in 7 minutes, right? But it's also the injustice of even being judged as being too soft or whatever, right? So cool. Thank you for doing that, Joel. That's for those of you listening in the moment. That's just someone sitting back, thinking, listening, paying attention, and seeing what extra things they can notice. And if you're like, I could add 100 things to that list, but that's how cool is that? You want to work with a mom or a dad or whatever, like that come around, they're going to know things you don't know and add to it. It just starts to paint a fuller picture. So thank you,
Yeah, of
Joel.
course. The last thing I'll say, Susan, because as you just said that, somebody could probably think of 100 different things. What's burning me is I didn't share one thing. And I'm like,
Oh,
well,
Kelsey.
what if that's the one thing? What if that's the one thing, right? Like, because her relationship with you how important is it to her? We don't know just from the story. And knowing you, I would assume it's pretty important to her.
Yeah,
So I'm thinking, is she looking and making your facial expressions as you're feeling all the feelings you're feeling about the teacher or what happened with that teacher? Does she make that about her? And is she thinking, why did Susan do that? Like how much of that is present? Is there any repair that's needed there? And we don't
really.
know. The only
It's
way to
really
find out is ask, right? Why is this happening and why now?
it's really neat because the story, like it's funny when you tell a story and you think you tell one story and others hear another story. I actually had a good relation. My looking at her and giving her that look and getting her to stop was how Kelsey was, right? She literally was diagnosed with ODD. Every kid who ever got diagnosed with anything in this community was given the oppositional defiant disorder. She was diagnosed with that. But that was actually an interbrain and a trust. And I loved her mom and had a lot of respect for her mom and had help, And so when I took her home and dropped her off, I told her what had happened, and so Kelsey was never upset with me at all. She blamed it was all Mrs. Smith who had she felt headed out for her whole, all through school, right? But it is so interesting that you picked up the interbrain because that was the actual strength that was there, right? So yeah,
And I
I'm going to
wonder,
flip it over. Yeah, go ahead, Trisha.
sorry, I just want to add to this and the beauty in Self-Reg. This can be done anywhere. This is a story about a school, but this Joel does this in therapy. We can do this in any sort of environment. And B, the other beauty that I find is it makes you think of the larger. I know the story's about Kelsey, but it makes you think of the larger context, right? So when you're talking about Susan and Kelsey, my brain's going to what's Mrs. Smith going through, right? Like, what is her, when we talk about the compassionate view of other people, is her pro-social stress reacting to Susan, who is like it's injustice in her view that this kid didn't get called out, right? What's going on with Mrs. Smith in her home life, in her work life, and her other things? Does she have a view that is strictly self-control as opposed to self-regulation? So all of these other stress detective questions kind of extend to the larger circle around Kelsey, including, you mentioned the principal who normally would be okay, but like we flipped a chair, so we gotta
Yeah.
have some sort of reaction to that, right? um, what does the stress look like on a Friday afternoon for the adults as well?
I love that you shared that because um, I have it comes very easily for me with kids and youth and marginalized, and usually with parents marginalized. But one of the ones that I find is a real self control teacher, which she was, Miss Smith was, and still is, I'm sure. A very self controlled teacher, but self reg can help you. We have to work on those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because what am I going to do? Give an article, or say, right? Like until we can see everyone with soft eyes. That's the language an elder gave me once many years ago. And what you just did was very true. She had actually put this together as an assembly. She was one of a team that had put a lot of effort into this, and it looked like disrespect, and
Mm-hmm.
so the very
Mm-hmm.
you're encouraging me to be a better to walk my talk on someone that actually it was harder for me to have the compassion for. So thank you for that, Trisha. All right. So Inez, did you want to respond to that?
Sure. I was just going to talk a little bit about how I use self-reg within my own practice and specifically the five domains. So, like Joel, I also use it to gather information, but what I use it most with is once I have a good understanding that a child is really for themselves starting to understand what stress looks and feels like. I use the resource that's on the website. And so there's a phenomenal resource with the five domains, and it gives examples of stressors. So we go through all of those stressors and we highlight which ones they may be experiencing. And then we take those five sheets and we play Jenga. So for every stressor that the child is experiencing, we pull out a peg.
And typically, the Jenga tends to fall. So, there we talk about energy and what that looks like, and how if we don't practice things like reduce and restore, the strategies that we need for our own self care, we end up going to sleep with a depleted energy. So, the Jenga falling, and we wake up with the same one in the same state. But what I also use the five domains for is it gives me great insight into how to frame or how to have my space be a shared space for the two of us, a space of belonging. And so if I recognize that in, let's say, the biological stressors that the child had highlighted, that lighting, really sharp lighting is a stressor for them, then I will make sure to change the lighting I have in my office or ask, like, how do you feel about the lighting today? Right? Sometimes the window, the curtains are drawn, sometimes they're closed. So it really depends. So not only does it provide great insight to how they're feeling, but it also allows me to understand what I can do as the clinician to support them in the space that we're in. And I
That's
know
really neat.
that Trish has a great way that she uses Jenga because I've stolen a lot of ideas from her. So I'm going to pass this one on to you because you actually talked to me about using Jenga.
Well, stolen, no. Shared, yes. Um, five domains comes up a couple of times. So like I mentioned, I work at a board, and I'll show this picture. So this is the Jenga that we very lovingly created at the office. For those of you who are listening, we have the ends of the Jenga blocks are actually different colors according to the domains. And then in French, each of the blocks have one of the stress factors from the document that Anesh has was mentioning previously. And I do this in training with adults. So this is a good example about, yes, I use it at the board, but I also use it with adults in practice in English. So this activity can be used across the board. But when I present this to adults, I actually have a physical Jenga. This is the for those of you who are watching this on video, this is the Jenga that is in my car that I travel around with when I do my training. And then I have them go around the room twice, me included, and we pull out blocks, and sometimes it falls and sometimes it doesn't, and it kind of just sets a bit of a tone almost in the beginning of meetings where people might come in a little nervous, some pro-social stress about being judged or others, but we play a little game and it kind of lowers the stress in the room. And when we talk about the stressor, we talk about how different stressors are different for other people as far as intensity, right? Where lighting might affect me a little bit, it might affect somebody else a lot. So when we pull it, we talk about allergies. I have a ton of allergies. Somebody else might not have any. And so one little block might be one stressor, but one little block can also knock the entire thing over. And so it lends to a lot of really interesting conversations around the five domains. And to add, one of the other ones that I've used in practice for those clients of mine who use like Garmin's or Fitbits or this is not a paid promotion, obviously, Apple Watches. We sometimes go over their sleep. And so I know on my Garmin it says whether my sleep is good or fair or whatever, and then we talk about what was happening the night before. So like in real time in the session, I'll have them pull it up and, oh, you had poor sleep yesterday. What did you do before bed? So we go into some of the biological stuff, right? Like the night before this podcast, I know that I really needed to get some sleep. So I read for like 2 hours, and it was like fun reading, not work reading that I always have to do. And my sleep was great last night. So it's a really
Yeah.
cool way to kind of see the before and after of how the five domains also play out, because it'll lend to conversations of like, oh, I had a really huge disagreement with my partner, and I was thinking about that as I was dozing off, and how these things kind of pull, like we were talking about, pull the mind body connections in ways that are like physically, like you can see these as they
Mm-hmm.
affect you in your sleep, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Love that. And I have to jump in on the idea of the watches, the smart watches and things. One of the gaps that we have, like as people learn self-reg, they're often very much focused on reducing the stress and the strategies around all of that, which is important. Like you might be like, what does bright light have to do with it? Well, if you're carrying a 25-pound weight on your shoulder, and you could make that 24 pounds or 23 pounds, suddenly makes me able to go a little further. It's that kind of thinking. What are the little things I can do that might make a difference? But noticing the biometrics, you got to be careful. Like they're not perfect. They're improving them, and anybody that uses them, I use them, Stuart does. The best thing you can do is look for your patterns. But there's some cool
Right.
things you can do because we're not getting into the restorative states. Your heart rate when you sleep is supposed to go in an arc. It's supposed to go from high and it's supposed to dip down low and then begin to start to elevate as you wake up. If you're having it like a little C, if you're having a restorative sleep, so should your temperature. It should go from high and it should dip down and start to. And then starting to rev up, you're actually getting a bit of cortisol. It's getting you up in the morning. And so many of us, like for me, I use that one a lot because it helps me know it. You can align it with I've had a good sleep, right? But it's kind of fun to watch. Okay, how am I going to get it to be an actual a little bit of a C? And that just means that your heart rate goes down to where it's supposed to be resting. And things like video games late at night will actually keep the part of your brain activated, keep your heart rate more elevated, higher than it's supposed to be, right? So I find that these can be really any kind of a biomarker can be really, really helpful with beginning. Like to me, it can be really helpful with beginning to think about how do I get to more of those restorative states. Even when you attach it, someone said it earlier, I think it was the part one of this, talked about equating calm with a sore stomach. Well, sore stomach is actually equated with not getting into the restorative states. And if our brain is always
Hmm.
like on that sympathetic activation, our digestive, like we need to be in those states, parasympathetic system to get actual that's where your immunity, your immune system works. It's long-term memory. It's it's attached to learning, but it's also attached to digestion and metabolism. So it's attached to weight. If we're not getting into that state, even when we're sleeping, like we're supposed to be in and out of it all day long, then that's actually it's something we can work on. So I personally found that one really, 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 really interesting. I love the way you're using Jenga, Trisha. That's very, very cool, and I think I love the sense of community. Those of you just listening wouldn't have seen the smile that came across everybody's face here when Trisha said not stolen. What was it? Shared?
Shared.
Shared. That's right.
Shared.
Yeah,
Change that language.
when you have a
Um,
good idea like how to begin to, and it's not about the Jenga, but it's about the ideas. But what I love about Jenga is it's not just sort of gamifying or bringing that sort of element into it. You're actually bringing in the element of tension, right?
mhm.
Because
Mhm.
is it going to crash, is it not, that can affect. And so again, it's having people notice things in their body is really important.
it's it's
Whether
really fun to
oh,
see the adults, like they become kids playing. You hear
kids.
the oh when they
Mhm.
pull out the Jenga blocks. It's quite funny. But when you're talking too about something you just said, actually made me think of another way that I've included it in my practice is despite working in French, and like we've mentioned, the Jenga that I have at work is in French. I also have therapy clients that are French speaking, and
Right.
so they are strictly first language French, struggle but can kind of get by in English. And one of the things that the few that I've had have said is, you don't know how much of a relief it is that even
Yeah.
if I will sometimes still struggle with sort of translating the French into therapeutic words and doing all these sort of therapeutic things in French. It's a lovely space where sometimes I trip on my words, and that's okay, right? But
Yeah.
they being able to speak in their own language, being able to share their story in their own language, and being understood by somebody who can hold that space and hold those stories is really important to them. And that's another way that we work to like that I've worked to like reduce the stressor in that room. But that idea
And you see
of
that as a stressor.
yeah,
That means it consumes energy, right?
absolutely.
Mhm.
And the way that the three
Oh,
of us in practice, we hold stories for people so that once they leave our door, it's a little bit lighter overall. And that they can come back to the story. More than likely, the story is not going to change in the grand themes, but that that in itself is like a way that we work to reduce stress, and perhaps give them the space and the opportunity to restore on their own, and then come back and we discuss that, right?
Love it. I'm going to share one example and then we're going to go to the next segment. The last real segment kind of will roll in today about how we, self-reg for the caregivers, right? Those that are providing the care and how you use that yourself. But I have one other idea around the domain. So this is people can get. We do have tools on our website, but we also have that toolkit, which is $35 that you can download and has all kinds of stuff around the domains and other tools in it. But this is one from Kirsten Ween's work. So she has lots of graphics. She has the 5 domains graphics that they have images of stressors
Mhm.
in the various domains. And don't get at those of you out there listening. I'm like, is this emotion domain or social domain? It doesn't really matter. You use it to gather them, place them wherever best you can. So sometimes people get caught up on do they have it under the right heading or not. But one thing that she did this, and I've done it before, is we buy cookie sheets, and she has sent those away to get put on magnets, which I think you can just do at Staples. You give them the graphic, they put it on magnets, and she cuts the little stressors into cookies,
Ooh.
into yeah, and then she has cookie sheets, and I've done it where I've created a T, like just a simple T chart, with a strip or whatever on a cookie sheet. And we used it not just for stressors, but things that were restorative. You could use it in different ways. And there's something about the physical magnets, that's really nice. And then we would take
Mm.
screenshots, and then we would take snapshots of it with our phone. So you've got a record of it, and then you can reuse it, and you can watch how they change over time. So yeah, if others have creative ideas out there about how they use the 5 domains and how they look at the various stressors, please respond to the podcast. We'd love to hear more about that. So I am going to move us on to the question that I'm really curious about: how you use self-reg for yourself, and how what might be some of the unique things that those in your roles might need to think about when it comes to using the practices of self-reg.
I'll respond, but then I'm going to let one of them go first. The first thought that comes to me is this is the area where I'm really, really good about understanding it and helping people apply it to themselves. I am not as good
Yeah.
about applying it to myself, where I would also say that that has become something that I really need to take a look at. So I'll start there, and then I'm going to let everybody else go, and then I'll come back later with another idea.
And that's an important statement. So I'm really good at it with everyone else. I've come a long way,
Mm-hmm.
but I think many of us can relate to not being, you know, struggling to do taking on too much is one example, right? So, what are some of your strategies or practices or ahas or questions,
Nash?
maybe?
So I think when I'm thinking about this question, it takes me back to Foundations One. So I took a deep dive into self in the 5 domains because I really wanted to pick up on the idea that in order to be present in session, I need to know what's going on for myself. So I really started to track my energy levels and what stress did to them. And what I realized is that when I start feeling a certain way, I have these triggers that come out. And I often talk about this in session with like older youth and adults is that when I know when I'm starting to crave coffee, I'm not a huge fan of coffee. I don't really like to drink it. I don't mind the smell of it, but I'm not a fan of coffee. When I start to crave coffee, that is an opportunity for me to ask the why and why now question. What is going on for me? If I don't, I know I'm going into session with stress and there's other things that are going to come up. So it's like for me, it was about developing a sense of self and what is it that triggers or what are my triggers that allow me to know that I'm feeling dysregulated. And so that's kind of how I use it for myself is I essentially just did a deep dive and
Hmm.
looked. I'm still not very good at the reduce and restore. I'm still trying to figure out strategies that help with that. But what I wanted to tackle first was just even to recognize what was going on for me.
I too. We are in a selfless profession in education and in this therapy work. It is all about the other. And so when you turn that on us, um, I often go to Anesh and she's like, "You need to do this, or you need to relax. You need to find ways to restore your energy." Because sometimes I don't see it myself, right? So to have people who know me when I'm at my best and people who know me when I'm in struggle, that's a really good barometer for me, because I don't see it. Another good thing is working consistently on boundaries. I want to take all the
Mm-hmm.
clients I can take in the course of a week, but I have a day gig. And so saying, you know what, I can't do 12 this week. I don't know that I can do six, and being able to be honest with clients and shuffle things around if I need to shuffle or if I'm traveling for work. Because I think that there's this thing of, okay, but they need a session. I need to be here for them, right? No, I need to be here for me, like Anesh said, so I can show up as my best person for them as well. So that for me is a big piece, having better boundaries around my time and what I'm doing. Joel, well, all three of you know I'm a knitter and I need to do it for fun. Like if there's any expectation that um, things need to be done on a timeline or whatever, that becomes less restorative for me. But I find that like I just so funny note, I just made a school bus for my godson out of an Amazon box and it was the best flow state of restore that I
Mm.
have ever had. In and in 2.5 days, little man got a painted, homemade, crafted thing for Halloween and he lit up. And I was like, that right there, that's that feeling of like genuine restoration for me, right? So I
Nice.
think recognizing those moments, and I tend to have some perfectionist stuff. So like being compassionate with myself of like, listen, you're just not going to get this right all the time. It is
Mm-hmm.
so like sometimes we're going to screw up and that's okay, but you always have tomorrow to like try to do better. 1% better, like in Atomic Habits.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it too. So I wanted to start by saying I started in judgment because that's my first reaction to the question is like I'm terrible at this. I'm so bad. And then the more I hear you all talk, like actually I'm not as bad as I think I am at this. It was a couple of years ago that I found mindfulness, and not to say that mindfulness is always my answer, but I do think that there was something in the restore that I recognized. The first mindfulness teacher I had told me, Joel, you're tired and you need to sleep. And that was he put it with the noble idea of helping others is great, but you have to take care of you. And that turned into this whole, I think it was about a year long process of you can be included, because I live this mindset. My mindset is my very life as a human depends on how my constant thought of others and how I can help meet their needs, right? And how I can help others be the best of it. Like that's my I've lived by this concept, but I never included myself in
Mm-hmm.
that self. So I know Anesh has said this before in the past. I don't know if it was on the podcast or in a conversation we had, but finding the self and self-reg for me is it's just including myself into that, helping others, that I get to be included in that. That's okay. It's okay for me to be included in that. In fact, all of the others who benefit from the work that I do, they need me to take care of me. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the, I would say it is meditation practice at times if I'm feeling it. If I'm not feeling it, it's probably going to aggravate me. It's I wish it was playing music more than I actually like. I have a piano at home and I would love to play more than I do. I just don't make the space and time for it. So when I do play, it definitely restores things. And then I would also say if I'm able to get involved in some sort of art project, I've gotten really into painting shoes, and that has been a fun
What
practice.
is painting shoes?
So like I will get a pair of shoes, and then I strip the kind of the lacquer off the top of it, and then I
Yeah.
take leather paint and I'll paint the shoe to be the color that I want, and then put the gloss
Cool.
back on it. So spent a lot of time doing that.
Yeah.
And that was something that came out of COVID. And I would say the number one thing, if I'm cooking, that usually will be I know it takes a lot of energy to do it, but it's so powerful for me. Uh, I wish that I had the power to press a button to get better sleep, but I haven't figured that one out yet.
So I know for me, like we share a lot of same things. Learning self-reg, one of the big ones for me was getting rid of a lot of guilt I found around how I was as a teenager, or my often on times unhealthy relationship with food, and things I didn't get right, or not being enough for other. So that was a really big one, of learning just the science of all the different things. Like I said, the teenage me, the wild teenage me, was actually quite protective and that kind of stuff. So that's a big thing that I do have to do a lot of reframing. But I'm doing a lot of reframing now of I'm trying to get better at reframing things like, oh, I should help them because they really need me. And maybe, that kind of thing. And realizing what
Yep.
you all are saying is it's generous to take care of ourselves, right? Is one thing. One thing I do with the, because I run the organization too, one thing I do with our team, who is like, if you don't know the TMC team, they're pretty amazing, like all of them, right? Or they're just the kind of humans like we're on with here today that will just do anything they can to help, and not, usually see the best in people and all those things. But I'll often remind when one of them is going through a hard thing, I'm like, if this was me, because sometimes it has been me too. This last year I moved here, there was a lot of drama around kind of that. I would say, if this was me, what would you say to me? And then they can easily come up with that. Oh, have
Mm.
soft eyes for yourself. You're whatever, these sorts of things. I'm like, oh, turn that around to you, and that usually helps, because it's like, even though we know we can give it to other people, it's different to kind of try to put yourself in the shoes of actually taking a moment to say, what would you actually say? So that's one thing. Guarding the sleep is one of the biggest ones. So that's, I'm so like insane about, I have a cooling pad that has water, and even things like environment. Like I literally got in a fight. It was quite intense, that people in my home wanted a TV in my living room, and I would not let the TV go in my living room, and no judgment to anybody that does, but just for me, it would it made a difference. So that's one thing I do. I try to create my environment as best I can. But I also heard something I share with all of you, and I think it's not just the things I do to be in an environment that I like. It's, I need to create. Like last week I didn't feel like it, but I went out. I'm making new friends here. We're in this new place where I lived like a long time ago, and to go to like a paint night, and it was good fun, right? And it's not going to be on the walls in any galleries or anything anytime soon, but needing to, like, I like to create as well. So I love the advice that you gave. I mean, I think the big things that I heard were, we're human. We might have either perfectionist tendencies, or tendencies to be that doing at our detriment to help other people, doing way more than we can handle, right? We maybe aren't that greatest at taking our own advice, even if we've got some of the healthy stuff in place, right? And that just learning to be a little kinder to ourselves. It's like, Stuart's the best one for this. Like, I'll often send him a message. I probably do it every 6 months. I'm like, I'm not the right one, especially the ED side of things. I'm just like, I don't know how I ended up in the, some days I'm like, I'm not your typical ED, right? But doing the executive director, doing the best I can. And I'm like, I'm not, I feel like I didn't do justice to something. He's like, you wouldn't be the right person for this role if you didn't feel like that every now and then. And then he
Oof.
always tells me,
Stuart.
right? He
So
said, if you
good,
were
so good.
confident that you thought, and he always tells me, because I'll get stuck on the things that I said I was going to do and didn't do. And he's like, look back, tell me what you did over the last year. And I'm like,
Mm.
I'm like, okay. And he said, and you'll get to those ones, or maybe they weren't the right ones. So it's like, you have to, and for him, that's part of his mindfulness, being ob- like, not objective, but being able to genuinely look at where you're at, and we get so, our brain, the negative thoughts come from the lower part of the brain, tend to, where the positive thoughts, we can get in the habit of thinking like that about ourselves, but just taking a moment to take credit for the good thing that you did, I keep a folder that if I ever get any nice emails, and I have a little package, it's mostly letters from my daughter, the things she wrote me over the years that I'm having a rough day. I look at that, right? And I'm like, okay, good human trying their best, but, uh, perfectly imperfect, if you will. So, well, I think we're just going to end, if everyone is okay, on I'll give you, we'll go one final round. I'll let you respond with anything you want. And also, where's the hope? Where's any step forward that you may think of, anything that you think that you really wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to say, and where's the hope in the path forward?
When I think of hope, I just keep going back to, and I Trish and Joel and I talked about this, and I can't remember when, one of our conversations about this idea of community and how self-reg is really a community for people. And I remember saying to Trish, like, you brought me in, but the first time I met Joel, I felt like I was a part of a community. Like when there was three of us and we were able to talk just about our experiences and how much self-reg has impacted us professionally and personally. And now to get the opportunity to sit with you, Susan, it's just adding to that. So I have so much hope, not only for myself, but for the way that I might be able to help others. So I want to thank the three of you on here for that.
I love that. I think we should grow a community. Ding, 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 ding.
I
See, the
have an
brain doesn't
idea.
stop. We're supposed to look for less things to do, and it's like, wait a minute. Well, we've got to get Paula tapped in too, because this is a big part of her area from
Mhm.
our team as well. Like, I could just like, what more can we do? Thank you for that. That was lovely.
I had a bit of a funny, as we're talking, I had a bit of like an aha moment. Stuart is the one who instills hope for all of us.
Isn't he?
Like he is our John Boyd, if one would want to do a full circle thing back to the first episode. He is the one who leaves us all with hope. I'm thinking of any course I've taken, any conversation I've had, or have had the luck and the um, like the good opportunity to have with Stuart. He We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him and for you as
Totally.
well, right? And I did
Not
I
me. It's him. It's him. Yeah, it
I
really
think you
is.
you make a very good partnership. He brings the science and the research and the philosophy behind it, and you synthesize it in a way that can like bring it to people in an everyday in an everyday way. And when I spoke to Anesh about my experience at Symposium, Joel and I joke that it's like summer camp. You get sad when you have to leave.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to the sense of belonging in the sense of that like everything that you bring, you walk the walk, you don't just talk the talk. So at Symposium, which Anesh will come with me next summer,
Nice.
um, she'll be able to experience that for herself, right? And when we talk about the paradigm shift in one of our earlier conversations, I joked about the more that we build this community and build this sense of belonging and start working together to make a shift, the like paradigm shift will become a revolution, right?
Love it. I just love it. And Joel?
Who we? I don't even know where there's so like this is I often tell this story and I don't know if I don't think I said it the last time we talked, Susan, that I'm always looking at myself in this grand scheme in the world of like, okay, there's 7 to 8 million people on the planet, and my impact on the world is one human trying to help a small community just outside of DC. And every now and again, talking on a podcast, maybe it helps somebody, maybe it doesn't. Maybe somebody takes something away from something I write, maybe they don't. But I often think that if you look at one message, that my message is often like a raindrop in an ocean, right? And if you zero in on some of the work that I do and the people that I work with, I really want my impact to be like a cinder block in a bathtub, just massive, impact on someone's life. And I just think about conversations like this and getting people together and having conversations and where does something go. It's not just a ripple effect of finding self-reg. We're talking about changing people's lives, right? Like people are different humans from this, and whether it be from coming from the mind of Stuart and him understanding the science of the brain, to you being able to synthesize that in the beautiful, selfless way that you do it, to, Trish and Anesh get inspired by a guy named John Boyd who says, just bring hope. Like there's these little things that happen in our lives that bring us to these moments. And I just think, wow, like how will it be? And the only thing that I can say for sure that I know will bring hope is I need to show up tomorrow and I need to do something for somebody else. Like just continue to work hard, continue to give some of this message to others. I know, and Susan, we can talk to you a little bit more about this in the coming months. But by the time this podcast comes out, it'll be announced in our community here at Sandy Spring Friends School that Trisha, Anesh, and I are going to do something for our parents for a parent series, which should be really, really fun. So where this goes and what the community is, you know, you think and get together with people and keep working hard. We need to do better as a society. We just need to keep plugging away and trying to get the best out of human beings. It's a really hard world out there. And it's really easy for someone even like me who's dedicated and loves humans and loves people. It's really easy for me to get caught into things that really make me angry and that I want to respond to, and then I end up in an us versus them situation. So just continuing to find ways to have people find that sense of belonging. And the last thing I'll say is I was just reading this in a Jeffrey Cohen book on belonging over the summer. Is he kind of points out that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it doesn't necessarily have to be a hierarchy, because if you look at what without belonging, human existence is miserable and leads to sadness and eventually, a slow death with some of the things that come with the pains of not being able to fit in. So thinking, or not fit in, but belong. And, I really hope that the next time we talk, there'll be another great story from the great work that happens every day. So thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate this.
You're reminding me of sort of, my brain thinks in like metaphors, I guess, a bit, but that idea of like being a bit of a lighthouse, right? But then when the light gets dim, you got to fill the light. You know what I mean? Like, what do you do when whatever gets unplugged, right? But and you don't, it can be overwhelming sometimes just thinking about any of the problems that we're trying to take on or any of the populations that you're trying to help. But I love that model of the drip, drip, drip effect, right? And it's like you got a bucket. So my one little drip of water today into that positive bucket is how I respond to that child, or telling that, like we talked in the first podcast about, or telling, looking, mapping out all the awesome things about this child in the first session, as Anesh shared with us, right? Or, like the drip, drip, drip effect, or playing the Jenga, like Trisha plays, and all of a sudden you notice another stressor that you never thought about before, right? It's like just a drip, drip, drip effect. And if you can't control the outcome, but you can control, a lot of the times when we're in the state that, how we respond really matters, right? And it can add up over time. I just keep thinking of that. The story that I shared at the opening of the podcast was just something that happened to me 2 days ago, where someone I didn't know, who was an ECE, who told me she had a trauma history and she had a PTSD diagnosis, and there may have been some more stuff going on there. And after my talk about Self-Reg in early years, she wanted to talk about her, and I'm like, felt so unequipped, to do it. I'm not a clinician, and she had a counselor and all those things, but certain things would resonate with her. Well, I feel like I at least responded to her, taking the time and the care, right? And pointing her maybe in some of, we went for a walk. So we went for 15 minutes and she talked and I listened, right? So being, thinking about those sort of things, or the example that we just gave about Kelsey and how I responded in that moment, the way Joel helped me sort of see my stress and other people's stress, or Trisha brought it around to help me see that, the teacher who was actually really harsh, who, even though I'd like to say I wasn't judgmental, I actually realized with your thoughts that I am a little bit judgmental. So, okay, what about the stressors on that teacher? So everything is like a drip, drip, drip. We can learn more, taking care of ourselves, begin to think about how to apply some of these strategies, and I don't know, keep learning and learning forward. So I just want to say thank you to all three of you. That was so much fun. and so enlightening, all kinds of ahas. I'm sure we're going to hear really some good questions and thought-provoking ideas that come in response. So thank you, everyone. Share the podcast wide. Thank you. Thank you to
Thanks,
Joel,
Susan.
Trisha, and Inej.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.